Podcast. Cristo Rey Podcast. Cristo Rey Podcast. Cristo Rey Pod. Oh, hold on. This won't work. This week is Spirit Week, and we can't do the theme song in just the same old way. It needs a little more, dare I say, spirit? Or should I say, funk? Boy, oh boy, it's Spirit Week. Man, oh man, it's Spirit Week. I live each day for Spirit Week. I just can't sleep, it's Spirit Week. I wait all year for Spirit Week. My dreams came true, it's Spirit Week. Now brace yourself. Spirit Week. Yeah! Podcast. Cristo Rey Podcast. Cristo Rey Podcast. It's Spirit Week. Golly gee, it's Spirit Week. It's Smile Me, it's Spirit Week. Podcast. Cristo Rey Podcast. Cristo Rey Podcast. It's Spirit Week. It's Spirit Week, yeah!
Okay, welcome to episode 4 of the Cristo Rey Columbus High School podcast. You're here with Brianna, Ruby, Nurse Ross, and Nehemiah. We are going to talk a little bit today about the economic impact of COVID-19. But before we do that, why don't we just go around and say, what is the worst movie or TV show that you guys have watched in quarantine, or like the most ridiculous thing you've sat down and spent a bunch of time watching?
This took a little bit of time for me to think about, but I would say 16 Candles. I love romance movies, and I spent the entire movie hoping that the two would get together, and in the end, they sit at home and they blow out a birthday cake candle. So, I felt like I wasted time.
I don't know if I could say I have any, like, a worse show. I'd probably say a bad habit is I'm just learning to binge again, and basically I've been binging The Blue Exorcist. That's an anime that's really, really good. It's all about a character who's supposed to be an exorcist, it's supposed to like conquer demons, but he's actually the son of Satan, so it's really cool.
Yeah, I think I agree with Nehemiah. There hasn't been a show that I don't like. I just been binge watching like The Office and Perks and Recs and all these other type of shows.
So, Zach, that was a tough question for me because, unfortunately, I haven't gotten to watch a lot of TV because I have 2 little kids. But I thought about it, and I was like, what have I been watching after they go to bed? And most of it is like stuff I won't want to admit that I have been watching. But one thing that I have watched that has been, I guess, like really unusual, and at the end I'm like, gosh, I can't believe I sat down and watched that for an entire hour, was the Michael Jordan documentary that ESPN is doing, The Last Dance. My husband really wanted to watch it, and so I sat down and watched it with him. We've now watched, I think, 2 episodes, maybe 3. But I just can't believe I spent that much time watching a sports documentary. But it was good. So, but just very unusual for me.
Great. Well, sounds like we are all using our time effectively, I guess. Maybe some more than others. I know that my AP students are spending a great deal of time on their AP homework, of course. So they probably don't have as much time to binge watch, or at least they shouldn't. But I'd like to introduce our guests for today's episode. So with us today, we have Matt Dybel and Daniel Jameson, who both work in different aspects of the finance industry. And I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves for the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Happy to be here, and I'm excited to discuss the sort of economic and business impacts of what's been going on. It's been a crazy last few weeks, to say the least. So my background is in commercial finance. I work at a super regional bank, financing companies that are in the lower middle market. So we're basically giving loans to companies that typically make under 100 million in revenue every year. So we're providing debt to those businesses, most of which you probably haven't heard of on a national scale, but many of local businesses that you probably see in your given regions. Those are the type of companies that I'm financing.
Hey, folks. My name's Danny. As Matt said, I am a management consultant, which means I work with companies, both in normal times and in times of crisis, to solve whatever their individual business issues are. I specifically work in the healthcare industry and mostly with health insurance companies. And so this has, for me, been a very interesting time seeing it both from the economic standpoint, but also understanding how to meet some of the challenges of the population. So thanks very much again for having me on.
Yeah, I have a question actually. So what impact have you guys seen on the national scale of the economy so far?
Yeah, so when I think about the impact to date, which when I think about it, it's sort of February until now. The machine that is our economy has come to has slowed to such a slow pace as a result of the stay-at-home mandates and social distancing, et cetera. The biggest thing for me is unemployment. With people not being able to work, I mean, consumer spending is 70% of our gross domestic product. When people can't work, that means that they can't buy goods and services. It really is the critical DNA of our economy that drives everything else. So when everybody freezes and unemployment goes through the roof, it's that has been the number one thing in my mind that has driven a slowdown in the economy. But secondarily, I would say, so far, I think it's been interesting to learn, to see where some of the, cracks in the system are and where the inefficiencies are in certain sectors and with certain companies. So far, I think it's been really unemployment and inefficiencies in the system have been the two things that come to front of mind for me. Danny, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree, Matt. I think what's interesting about the economic troubles that we're going through now are we are all feeling exactly the impacts that are having a negative effect on the economy. So in previous recessions where it was financial markets, right? Very complicated equities and derivatives and things that brought the whole thing down, and during the mortgage crisis. So people felt the impacts, but it was kind of complicated and one or two steps removed from why the economy was falling apart. In this case, as Matt said, I mean, you can just go through your daily routine and think about all of the things that you're not buying and think about, not traveling in cars, not going on airplanes. Yeah, I agree with that. I think in particular, the part about, America tends to react when our backs are against the wall and make structural changes that are needed. And, you see whether it was the New Deal after the Great Depression or the GI Bill and America's new economy after World War II, or, you think the ACA came out great after the Great Recession because people felt, financially unstable, and that is part of healthcare. So we tend to see on the government side those types of changes, and on the innovation side, as Matt was saying, a lot of the technologies that we use today are, again, you see these surges and spikes coming out of when the economy goes down. So that's on the silver lining. I have just as much confidence as Matt does that there will be a recovery. How specifically is it going to be different? I think like all of these delivery services from a consumer standpoint, all of these options of ways to interact with how you get your consumer goods, whether it's at a restaurant or a store or a grocery market, being able to pick it up, having it delivered to your house. I think all of that's going to be here to stay, and that's like an overall good thing, I would say. There's a lot more flexibility.
Allocated a certain amount of money to these businesses. So like, how long do you feel like this can continue? Whereas like we have the means to support these small businesses, but also as a consulting person, how would you say, is it worth the risk for these small businesses to go back open with the risk of like are we really going to slow the curve down? Are we really helping the overall benefit of the country? Because it's kind of like the difference between, is the economy more important than the social well-being of people?
So the government is ultimately relying on what's called SBA approved lenders to facilitate the loans, and we are an SBA approved lender. If there's one thing that is universally true, it's that the amount that has been given so far is not enough. Now, when you think about it, is it, there's a couple things that could happen from the government providing this kind of support. One, you could have a lot of companies getting the money that probably shouldn't. And two, you also will be giving money to those who, by and large, a lot of businesses out there have reason to exist and should be operating on a daily basis and are an important part of.
But then second is going to be the demand. And the demand is, are people going to show up to my restaurant? Are they going to come into my store and shop? And I think on the supply side, it will be relatively quicker to open back up because this is everyone's livelihood and they are interested in being able to pay their mortgage and continue to be able to send their kids to school. So when the government allows them, you'll see businesses start to open pretty much immediately. The question those businesses have to think about is there going to be demand when they open? And that's mostly about, are people going to feel comfortable going into those places? Are people going to feel comfortable going to a baseball game? Whatever it might be. And that's going to take longer. And it's going to be different segments of the population that feel comfortable going in at different times, even when they're allowed. And so the demand will have to grow over time. And so businesses are going to have to decide, does it cost me too much money to be open at the beginning? Then people are actually going to start walking in the door. And so as these things start to trade off of one another, is a little bit of why it's going to take longer to come back than it did to shut down, because you have to have that demand to meet the supply.
I just wanted to agree with both of you because I've seen, like, even myself, Cash App, they show you like stocks, and you can see like businesses that have gone up in stocks and businesses that have gone down. And a lot of like really popular businesses that are out there today have gone down in stocks. So you can see it like live and in action that things are actually happening to these businesses who are unable to go to work. I was just wondering, what do you think is like keeping the economy up right now? Like, what's the best thing keeping the economy?
The economy essentially is alive right now because the federal government has parachuted in trillions of dollars to keep it afloat. And it's done that in a whole bunch of different ways, including, increasing the payment for unemployment, giving basically interest-free and forgivable loans to small businesses. It's given industries like the airlines in healthcare just money to keep the whole.
Totally agree. I mean, it's as we were going through the headache and madness of getting the funds distributed, everyone was doing it knowing this has to happen. I mean, there is no other option. When you have a capitalist economy where demand goes to zero, you still have expenses that need to be paid by those businesses, and the most important one being payroll expenses. And so the actions that our government has taken to support payroll, to support people who, programs like unemployment, and I mean, that's 100% the answer. Is without the government funding it, it could have been a lot worse over the last few weeks than it actually has been. So it's been a huge headache, but everybody in the banking sector who's dealing with it knows that this is the way it has to happen, so.
I've been seeing a lot about the small business loans that were interest-free, I believe, being given to large businesses that maybe they weren't intended for. And some of those large businesses are choosing to give them back. Some are not. It seems like there's more to the story than like the headline.
Yeah,
so
that's
curious.
That's Matt's fault, so I'll let him explain that.
Okay, yeah, I'd be interested to hear.
All right, well, I'll try to make my case, and then Danny can give me a hard time regardless. Like, where do you draw the line, right? If your company is owned by a very wealthy family. And theoretically, that family could reach into their personal wealth and fund your payroll for a couple months. Does that sound okay? Okay, well, what about 6 months? Well, what if that company's funded by two wealthy families? It is so difficult to draw the lines in such a short period of time as this has occurred over that it's really difficult to put it in legislation, and then it's even more difficult to put into action legally, and so that has been, to answer your question, absolutely, there have been numerous examples of people getting the money that didn't actually need it. But a lot of people had the perspective that says, hey, if I can get this interest-free forgivable debt, I'm going to go ahead and try. And as of last Friday, the government came out and said, for those who realize that, the spirit of the legislation is not for you, I think they gave until May 7th or May 8th to pay it back. Let's say no harm, no foul. It is fascinating, sometimes very worrisome, to see how people are literally shooting at the hip in government, in banking, in legal. I mean, nobody has had to deal with this before. We are all sort of learning as we go along here.
Yeah, and I would say, there's a question about two different questions. One, is it fair? And two, does it work? And I think a lot of times when we talk about this, we fail to tease the two apart. And so it inherently feels unfair for a big company to get some money and taking it out of small businesses' hands. It feels unfair if you were an investor and the company you invested in gets bailed out. You're not actually taking on the risk that company had. But on the other side is does it work? And I think that the reason we had to get it into the economy so quickly without very many restrictions is because the money was just needed across the economy, whether you were a small business or not. And so if the idea is to keep people in their jobs, and Shake Shack gets $10 million, well, Shake Shack employs a lot of people. And if they were going to use that $10 million and keep their company and keep their restaurants open and make sure that they were paying the rent on their lease, then that worked as well.
Do you think our government did take a good immediate method into this pandemic? And if no, do you guys think it was because of the lack of funds for preventions, like pandemic preventions? Because a lot of times we see in the news that the government puts more money into other types of things, and do you think this is something that we're lacking of creating awareness over?
That's a really good question. So I think back to what Matt was saying about, no one's gone through this before. And so we have to keep in mind, yes, we have very high expectations for what our federal government should do and what the American people deserve. At the same time, I mean, it's brand new, right? And there was a lot of predictions at the beginning that had countervailing arguments about how bad it would be and about how much of the economy or of the American people would be impacted. So it's a hard job. That being said, there have been a number of things that if you could go back, you would do differently. That's without a question. And certainly, anything that relates directly to impacting the humanitarian side of the crisis are things that we're going to have to take a long, hard look at when we do kind of a morbidity and mortality on the whole thing a year from now. Not having adequate protective equipment for our healthcare workers, not having testing up to speed fast enough, not having a way to cycle down the economy and then cycle back up kind of as a precautionary measure. Those are all things I think we all expected and didn't meet the expectations when we got there.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I mean, personally, from a distribution of funds in the banking system, if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would say absolutely not. The government is taking forever. in hindsight, it actually has been pretty, I would say things have happened a lot faster, not, the sweat and blood notwithstanding to get it done. It actually has, I think the way the speed at which legislation has passed and the way that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, has continued to update the intention of loans, blah, blah, blah. I think all of that has actually gone better than I would expect. So from a banking funding standpoint, I say all that purely from that. But from a, like what Danny was referring to, the infrastructure of, being able to deal with a pandemic, I think we would all agree that responsiveness and that infrastructure setup has not been sufficient.
So I would say my question kind of correlates what you guys are saying, but I'm just asking about what are some of the long-term effects you see present in the economy? Like, what are some of the things you see differently now that we've gone through this?
Yeah. So I think, I mentioned before how a freeze of demand where you have companies not earning revenue. There are a lot of businesses out there that probably had something wrong with them to begin with that won't survive this. I think it will be a more healthy recovery. I think things like automation and innovation, innovation is driven mostly by necessity, right? When businesses either have to innovate or they go away, that's going to lead to a stronger fundamental economy in the end. It may take a while, but things will get better. We will, whether it's, we change our social distancing practices and travel habits and things like that. At the end of the day, there will be, a recovery. At the time of the last recession, it was really, really dark, and you just saw, so many different layers to that disaster that had built up over such a long period of time. All things considered, I think long term this will be. I have a lot more optimism now than I did back then, at least. Curious what Danny thinks.
Are you a leader? Do you have what it takes to get things done? Are you ready to represent your school community and your peers? Have you ever thought that there might be a more efficient way to make sure we don't run out of cups at school dances? Well, Student Council is the organization for you. Run to serve as your class's next representative, or, better yet, run to be a school-wide officer for the entire organization. Next week, election season starts for Student Council. Be on the lookout for information about how to get your name on the ballot. Just listen to some testimonials from Student Council officers about the impact of the organization on their lives.
Hi everyone, this is Kevin, your Student Council Treasurer. If you are thinking about running for Student Council next year, here's 2 reasons why I think you should. You get to be the voice between the students and the administration. Another reason is you get to help better Cristo Rey's school culture and make it into something that it's never been before. So, I encourage you all to run for Student Council. It is a great experience to be a part of, and it's something that you'll never forget. I'll always remember my 2 years being a part of Student Council.
Through Student Council, not only do you get the opportunity to represent those around you, but you also discover how vital it is to speak for those who can't always speak for themselves.
Hey Cougars, this is Regina, Vice President of Student Council, and I really encourage you all to consider running for Student Council because it's a great way to get involved in the school and make a difference.
You should run for Student Council because you'll be doing something bigger than yourself, and you'll be a part of a family that cares about the school, that cares about the students, and that also cares about you.
Jason Blankson says not serving on Student Council was his biggest regret of his high school career. So make sure you get your name on the ballot to run for Student Council this next school year. Remember, decisions are made by those who thank you for illustrating the importance of an understanding of history when you are considering any of these topics. I'm sure Mr. Corrigan would be very proud as well.
That was just for you, Zach.
I noticed it too.
But so maybe if we want to kind of turn our attention, I'd love for you guys on Student Council. We sort of started this podcast as a way to educate, but also start a conversation with the students of Cristo Rey. So maybe we could turn our attention to sort of personalizing this discussion a little bit. What do you guys think are, for students, what are some things you're hearing in this conversation that you think are really good points for our fellow students and members of the Cristo Rey community to understand? And then maybe just generally, we can all think of some pieces of advice we might have for students who are seeing the news, or students' families who are seeing these headlines and worried about the solvency of the economy. And, are they going to lose all their money? Is this panic? Should they be in a panic? And what are some pieces of advice we might be able to share? So maybe if we want to kind of tackle that issue, I think that would be really helpful for our audience.
I was thinking that, like, in times like this, people tend to think, oh, there's not going to be a way out, and like we're going to be stuck in this, and it'll keep going on and on and on. And I think, as they reiterated a lot, they kept saying that it's going to be a gradual change. Like, we're going to start, it's not going to stay like this. We're going to eventually evolve, and it'll get better. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind, because when you're in situations like this, it might feel like forever. So I feel like that's one thing. I feel like if you think that now's the time to like go ahead and do whatever you want, like financial stability and all of that is really important. So you want to make sure that in your family, you're keeping that in mind when you're talking to your parents, or you're using your money for something. Look at the stocks. When you're looking at the news, you might see that things are plummeting now, but again, gradual. It's going to keep going up eventually. It's just not happening now. Things are very loose and loans are being thrown all about. So we need to make sure that we are keeping that in mind as we continue to live our lives.
Yeah, I agree with Brianna. I feel like patience is a big key in this whole situation. I feel like we have to have patience, and that things are not permanent. This is just a temporary thing, and with time, we're gonna all find a way to adapt to this new norm, because this is gonna be a new way of living, and we just have to adapt to how society is gonna change overall.
Yeah, basically, I would say to reiterate both Ruby and Rihanna, it's like gradual change is still change. And through these podcasts, we looked at life through different lenses. For instance, health, and now the economy. And it's kind of like just your understanding of various different intricacies of like, well, I didn't really understand that before. But I feel like another one people are going to start to understand now is the importance of your small local businesses. Some people who traditionally didn't value them as much now might come out of this like, hey, you know what? I know so-and-so is a family-owned business, so I'm going to try to make it important of my life to be like, I'm going to support you just in case something like this happens in the future.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I agree with your idea. I didn't even think about that people are finding alternate ways to do things, because, a lot of the businesses are closed, like having haircuts. People always pay to get them done. And with this, we're starting to learn that there's alternate ways. You could have your girlfriend, boyfriend, brother, sister, cut your hair. There's alternate ways to, like you said, cooking and cleaning. You could start doing that yourself instead of using money. So in a way, you're kind of finding new ways to pay for things and maybe help solve some of the financial issues you were having before the whole thing started.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we're finding different ways to spend time together too. I mean, I think it looks a little different, but it's really been interesting to see how people get creative with that. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, and we are like, for the students who are listening to our podcast, I feel like it's like important to keep in mind, like in a couple of years, like we're gonna go out to the world, and I know it's like cliche to say, but we are kind of like the next generation who's gonna be handling all these type of problems. And I feel like for a lot of us, this could be an opportunity to get creative and find new ideas and ways that we can, in a way, modernize or like innovate what we are seeing like wrong in today's government, to apply that later in future government and governing ways of doing things. I feel like this is very important for a lot of us in that way.
Yeah, you're right, Ruby. Like Mr. Dybel said, we could even use some of the things they said on our AP government test, apparently, which is good to know. Like, we're already using this right now. And like you were saying, I was like writing down stuff because I was like, maybe in the future, this is going to be in textbooks. I was writing stuff about COVID-19 and everything that's happening. I was like, people are going on TikTok. The government is doing this. Stocks are doing this. You know, financially, we're doing this. I was like, I can't wait till like one day I grow up and I'm going to be able to like notice differences in it because of what I'm seeing today.
Yeah, I just add that I agree that it's highlighting things that I'm taking for granted, and many of those things are government services. I have three little kids, 5, 3, and 1, and my wife and I were just talking last night about the parks. It was totally lost on me how much time my family, with kids that age, spends on the swing set or walking along the lakefront trail here in Chicago. And that's all. I mean, it's for public use, but much of it's maintained by the government. And that's one of the things that I'm most looking forward to having open back up. And I think there's a number of those instances, certainly with schools and things like that. And in the future, I hope like my own behavior reflects, putting my money where my mouth is, and those things that I realize now are so important to me and my family.
Yeah, there's a Robert Kennedy in one of his famous speeches quoted an ancient Chinese curse that was purported to go, may you live in interesting times. And I always thought that was an interesting way to think about it, right? That it's a blessing and a curse sometimes to live in these periods of unpredictability. But certainly, I like what you guys had to say about innovation and finding that silver lining in opportunities. And Ruby, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the economy and the world are going to change, and either we're going to have to find a way to change with it, or we're going to have to face the consequences. So before we go, I thought, first of all, big thank you to our guests. This has been a very enlightening and helpful conversation. And so, as is tradition, we'll kind of end with one thing you're doing recently that has helped you cope with social distancing, and maybe students can try it out if they think you have some good advice. This can be related to the topic in terms of finance or completely random. For example, I have recently rediscovered the excellent snack that is apples and peanut butter. Oof, that is some good stuff, let me tell you. So if you're looking for a treat and trying to keep it healthy, apples and peanut butter is the way to go.
I would say the purchase of a steam cleaner for like wood floors. Mops are so messy. I got this thing, and I have a dog, so my floors are sometimes not the cleanest in the world. It's definitely the dog's fault, not mine. But this steam cleaner thing is magic. So if you get the opportunity, it's much better than a broom or a mop.
Matt, you're showing your age.
But I would definitely say what's keeping me in this whole myth is probably like valuing music, because I've always been a big like listener of music, and now I'm taking the time to like learn new music or just broaden my horizon of music. So I'd pretty say, it's a good coping mechanism.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nehemiah, but I think for me is listening to music while cleaning. I found out that cleaning really relieves some stress. So I've been cleaning my room like 2 or 3 times, and I've run out of things to clean now.
Yeah, I agree with both Nehemiah and Ruby. I found some new songs. I like Frank Ocean now. I didn't know about him before. And I've been like redecorating. I've been trying to find ways to like improve my life since I've been home, because when I'm at school, I know a lot of people can attest to this. You just don't have time.
So I think I've told you guys that I like to run. And so I've been running every day with my daughters, but just to do something a little different and spend time with people. My sister will pull up like an Orange Theory workout on YouTube, which if you guys are looking for something to do exercise wise, they're pretty good, and you don't need weights or anything. So you can find them on YouTube, but we've been doing them together because they're a little bit boring. It's like circuit stuff, but we just talk like the whole time, and we just spend time together, and it's been like really nice to do something like that with people that I love. That's also a good use of my time.
Yeah, I am doing a lot of cooking. I've always enjoyed cooking, but now, I have extra time and kind of trying out new things, more complicated things than I normally would, making every meal like a little bit more special than I would have in the past. So maybe it's just an example of ramping it up on a hobby I already had.
Nice. Well, yeah, all great things to try out. And so for all you listening out there, feel free, if you're looking for a way to relieve some stress or try something new. It sounds like we got some great advice. Well, thank you again to our guests for stopping by, and we'll see you guys in our next episode.
Podcast Cristo Rey Pod. What's this? Okay. All right. I can dig it. Let's see what we got. Spirit Week is the greatest week. Spirit Week is the greatest week. Spirit Week is the greatest week. There is no other week like it. Spirit Week is the greatest week. All other weeks disappoint me. Spirit Week is the greatest week. All other weeks make me so sad. I wish every week was Spirit Week. Yeah!